You're going to go outside and run with the kids? Yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. All right, we get to start back in Isaiah tonight, and like every week, we play soap opera catch up. And does anybody remember where we left off last week? What it was that we were talking about? It was a haughty. Yes, it was a haughty woman, and that was where we ended off, or the week before last, actually. And so we'll go back and cover that, and we'll get caught up on what happened. Remember last week, what was happening was is that in the scriptures, um, there was a specific reference being made to the haughtiness of the people in regards to how they looked at and viewed God and how they respected God, Yahweh. And that was a consequence then that they suffered because they were haughty and because they were disrespectful. God allowed the consequences of their actions to come upon them. And we know that that was very bad in the case of Second Kings historically. As we look in Second Kings and Chronicles, what we see is the lead up to where we are in Isaiah. And I had an actual opportunity in the business world this week to share the story of Sennacherib. And remember the prism that we studied? There was the prism that was captured from Sennacherib, and it's now actually in the Chicago Museum. In 1919, that was purchased by the Chicago Museum, and it exists in America all the way from Mosul, Iraq. So maybe we could take a field trip one day to Chicago. That'd be fun. I tried to take the group one time when we were a smaller group. I was going to take everybody to the Bible Museum. We just didn't get enough people to jump in, but I wanted to lead a group through the Bible Museum. I thought that would be fun. It is very much worth the trip. I love it. It's Kelly and I were members at one point. Yes, yes. So this week we will move into what God expects fruit to produce and how it should, from an abundance standpoint, actually happen. And we'll see, hopefully we'll get that far this week if we don't run out of time. So as a replay of where we are, remember Isaiah exists at the time of multiple kings. And so we're seeing kingdoms transition. And keep in mind, and this is important tonight because I'm going to have to make a distinction tonight as we read the text. There's a difference between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom were primarily made up of the Judaites and the Benjamites. The Benjamites, thank you. And then the northern kingdom was made up of all the rest of the siblings, or the ancestry of the tribe of Israel. And the kings that were in between those were considered evil primarily. And they were not kings that operated in such a way that pleased God, because they were giving the people over to idol worship. And they were encouraging things that were deplorable in God's mind. And it completely violated the rules that had been set aside for the Israelites at Mount Sinai. And we'll see a direct reference to that tonight. And there's a deliberate reason why I drew this, whatever color arrow that is, back to Exodus, because Isaiah is all the time connected back to Exodus. And we're going to see that significantly this evening as we move forward. In Isaiah 3 last week, just to put us back in the frame of mind, what we're dealing with is haughty women. And these haughty women, if you recall, it was the look at me attitude. This is where they were talking about, they had the daughters of Zion. To be clear here, Zion is a direct reference to the city of Jerusalem. And so the women that were being talked about here were these women of Zion, and they walked with an outstretched neck. And I thought this was that good picture, and that flirting glance with their eyes that my wife makes at me occasionally, just like that. And then say anything about a haircut, and I'll have Will Smith come see you. And And then that mincing along as they go, that prancing and that dainty walk, and their feet rattle with bangles. And I've got some interesting pictures tonight that I'm going to show you about traditional. We see it today primarily in the uh, Lebanese, sorry, I'm struggling with my words, the Lebanese dress. We can see that in modern times. And it said the Lord will make the heads of the daughter of Zion scabby. So something that they would feel very uh, questionable about their appearance. He's going to even scab over their head, and he would lay their foreheads bare. So when you think about that, think about my bare forehead. My hairline's way back here now. But what ends up happening is think about a woman's hairline being like that in this time and how it would be embarrassing. And so we think about that, and as we move, that was last week where we ended, and we're going to keep moving forward in Isaiah 3 this week for just a short period of time. There's a couple of things as we move through this week. What I'm going to do is take a pause for a minute, and I'm going to talk about the significance of those items from a jewelry perspective. So as we move through the scripture, just bear with me as we do that. In that day, the day of these haughty women, the day of these people mincing around with the extended necks and the scabby heads, in that day, the Lord will take away the finery of the anklets. So, what are we talking about there? We're talking about ankle bracelets. Does that mean that we shouldn't wear ankle bracelets? No, not at all. If you want to wear an ankle bracelet, the Lord is not saying here you can't wear an ankle bracelet. Who was this written to? Those women in the period of 740 some BC. It was written to those women about the attitudes that they were having. And the finery of the anklets and the headbands and the crescent necklaces. Do you see the crescent necklace she wears? We don't know for sure. It could be, but it's really what we're going to see here. Almost as you go down through this, you're going to see almost a complete stripping of anything that was ornate. And that is where we see, for instance, in modern day cultures, the holiness church, where the holiness church will wear no earrings, no necklace, no head material. Oftentimes that is in a very orthodox and reverent fear of they don't want to do anything to draw attention to themselves. Does that make sense? And so, why would they say that? Well, possibly because of what we see here in Isaiah, because of how the women were deliberately drawing attention to themselves. The pendants and the bracelets and the veils that they would wear, the headdresses and the armlets and the sashes, the armlets. Think about it almost like a band, a golden band that you could wrap around. You see the woman's got a long sleeve here. And think about some kind of band that would wrap around her arm that would be gold and bedazzled or some sort that would, bring attention there as well. The sashes that she would wear, you see a sash on this woman here. And then the perfume boxes and the amulets. So think about this for a minute. I mean, we just got a pretty much dress code. We got the Sears and Roebuck catalog of how this woman would have dressed, right? Can you see it? And it's very ornate. The signet rings and then the nose rings. I did actually some historical research on nose rings. Have y'all ever historically looked at nose rings? I had never till I studied this. It's actually kind of interesting. Yes, Jennifer. An amulet is like a large, today, not quite a breastplate, but it's a large piece of jewelry that would have been on there. It's funny, I'm making fun. Who was the kid that used to bounce around and you had like the big clocks hung around his neck? Player, Flavor Flav. He would hang a clock around his neck. Flavor Flav was a rapper, and he would like wear a clock around his neck, and it would be this huge clock. That's an amulet, and it really draws attention, and it might have some kind of ornamentation on it of some sort. We would consider it gaudy. And then a signet ring where they could actually like sign their signature in wax, that kind of thing. But the nose ring, this was very interesting to me. Nose rings have many different connotations depending on what society you come from. If we look in traditional African society and we look over even into the Middle East somewhat, not as much in the Middle East, but if you then cross over, and I guess some people would argue into India, the West Indies and stuff, in Indian society and in African society, the larger the jewelry or stone or bone that is inserted into the nose, the higher the wealth status. So whenever we see in African cultures large objects inserted through the septum, which is the part between the nose, and inserted through, that is a symbol of wealth. Whenever we see others inside, what you'll see is an ancient nose rings, and in modern nose rings too, you'll actually see if it's mounted in the nostril, it'll actually be inserted and then turned up to lay in the nostril flat to give it some steadiness against the outside nostril. And so the hopes were is that obviously that could draw attention as well. And then the nose ring is probably the one that's most controversial. The nose ring would actually pinch between the septum here, and it could mean nothing, or it could go as far as to mean slavery. Because a nose ring, if you think about a nose ring in an animal husbandry, what are nose rings important for in animal husbandry? To lead them and to control. And so you'll see this connected in the scriptures, oftentimes scripturally to slavery. And so I'm not saying there's a direct connection, but you do see that oftentimes spoke of in connection with slavery. And nose rings were used in this time period as well. So there's nothing new under the sun, y'all. I mean, we look at nose rings and piercings and all these things, and we put taboos around them. They've been here for 2,700 years or more, okay? But let's keep going. We're in chapter 3 here. The festal robes, and I put this picture here of this woman because I thought that it was very indicative of this. This is a modern day dress, but I felt it also with the turban that she had on her head. Because keep in mind, who are we speaking of? We're speaking of women. Okay, the festal robes and the mantles. Now, a mantle, you and I would consider a mantle in this way today. Did grandmama or did anybody ever have a crocheted thing that was put on a baby that whenever they were being christened? You know what I'm talking about? My great grandmother, she really got dressed up, really got dressed up and took her apron off. You know what I mean? She wore her apron all the time because that's where she kept her snuff. But if I'm not kidding, Grandma Stisher was the one that carried, remember the snuff can with the white label, Prince Albert? She carried Prince Albert, and Granny Stisher had no teeth in her head. And she would always want to give you kisses. Come here, let me give you a kiss. You know, and you're like, oh my gosh. We would actually sneak in because Granny Stisher was from Holly Pond, Alabama, and she slept with her eyes open. And it was the weirdest thing. And she talked to herself in her sleep. We would literally go in my aunt's house and get at the edge of the bed, and the great grandkids would lean up over the bed while Granny Stisher slept. And she would just be talking to herself with no teeth in her mouth, and you'd freak you out. And you'd go running out of the room. Mama, mama. Sorry. It has nothing to do with Bible study. But Lord have mercy, y'all brought it back. I don't know what it was. Somebody please wear an apron for me one day in a sundress. Yes, with snuff in it. So, but the festal robes and Granny Stisher, that's how we got to Granny Stisher. The mantle. If Granny Stisher really got dressed up, she would put a crocheted piece over her collar. That was the equivalent of a mantle. But in these times, a mantle would be much more ornate. It might have you ever seen a Western duster, a cowboy duster? And it has if it's got the top on it that flares out a little bit, that's kind of a mantle, okay? And so those are what I want to put in your head. These festal robes and these mantles and the cloaks and their handbags. Is it any? I mean, it's really not that much different than modern day. And the mirrors and the linen garments and the turbans and the wraps. We don't think about the turbans in our culture, but the turban here it's actually very pretty, isn't it? I mean, it's not untasteful at all. Yes, what? Yes. No, they wouldn't typically carry the mirrors that we're aware of, but the perfume boxes, yes, they would, because bathing, even in our modern history of our country, perfume boxes would be worn, they would be perfume satchels. And so it would be like little bags of potpourri that would be worn because you stunk. I mean, you didn't take baths often, and personal hygiene was not as important. So, it would keep this, if you get it close enough to the nose, it would keep the smell away. Really? That's interesting. I didn't know that. I never found that. So if we go on, and this shall happen because of these women acting like they are, because of this haughtiness, there will be a stench inside instead of perfume. Now, I did not have room because of the slideware, and I didn't want to scrunch the text up to where it was unreadable to make an eye chart. But really, what you need to do in your mind is you need to take the text that we just pulled in, and you need to lay it next to this text. And so it's almost like it's being juxtaposed against one another as we're reading here, okay? So there will be a stench instead of perfume, and a rope instead of a sash. What typically is tied around, the sash is tied around the waist. When is a rope tied around a waist in this culture? In exiles, in slavery. When is a rope used? To pull a train of people that have been captured. You get the connection here? A rope instead of a sash, and baldness instead of a well-set hairdo, and clothing wrap of sackcloth instead of a rich robe. When is sackcloth used in Jewish culture? Typically, mourning and penitence. Mourning. The book of Job, we see he in sackcloth sitting on a pile of ash, and in this culture, you would put ash on you as a form of penance and of mourning. Branding instead of beauty. What kind of branding? I'm talking about like cattle branding. In modern American culture, we see branding of an animal when they would brand that animal because it belongs to Curtis and his ranch. But in this, you're being branded. I'm not that I'm in favor of this TV show, but in the TV show, I think it's Yellowstone is the name of it. They actually brand the ranch hands in Yellowstone to mark them for their service and who they belong to. Your men, now he picks this theme up with men. Your men shall fall by the sword. Do you see the demise? The people are haughty in their mind, and now the demise is coming, and your warriors in battle. And her gates shall lament and mourn. Who is her? The city of Zion. Yes, Fred. Yes. Pride cometh before the fall. We see it in New Testament terms labeled as pride, and then we see haughtiness here. And her gates, Zion, shall lament and mourn, and she shall be banished. She shall sit upon the ground. You see, it's giving you an imagery deliberately of the entire population being suffering the consequences of this poor leadership. Uh, we should not think in modern times, in our self-sufficient society, that we will escape consequences of evil whenever we have chosen not to stand against it. Does that make sense? If we choose not to stand against abortion and other things like that that are abhorrent to God, and we believe that somehow because we've lived godly lives, we will not face the consequences of it, we're not reading Scripture for what Scripture says, right? Because were there godly people that existed? Sure, had to be godly people. Did they suffer the consequences, though, of the nation? Yes. And whenever you study the Hebrew Bible, you have to study the Old Testament as a nation, not as a person. Because Israel will tell you, if you talk to a rabbi and you talk to other people, God speaks to the nation of Israel. God speaks to the people of Israel, not to a person specifically. And you say, well, Chad, how do you back that up scripturally? Yes, Moses came to the mountain, but Moses spoke as a prophet to who? People of Israel. And so we can't escape that is how the economy of God works from a relationship standpoint. And this shall happen. Pardon me. Double. So now what? Something's messed up. Hold on. I'm sorry. Bear with me just a second. Let me skip over Isaiah 4. Copied some text wrong. Isaiah 4. No. Isaiah 3:24. Sorry. Yeah, I just had it labeled wrong. And sorry. So what he does is he makes a quick transition from Isaiah 3 into Isaiah 4, and this is verse 1. It just has the chapter there. And 7 women, this is Isaiah chapter 4, verse 1, and 7 women shall grasp at one man on that day. I don't mind being outnumbered, but this is not in a good way. Okay? Look what's happening. We will eat our own bread and we will wear our own clothing. In other words, you don't have to, if you'll simply marry me and get me out of this destitute lifestyle, if you'll be a man who protects me, the times are so bad in Jerusalem that if you will just do that, I'll provide my own food. I'll provide my own clothing. I will not ask you for a dowry. And only let us be called by your name so that it takes away our disgrace, the women. So times have become so bad that so many men have been killed by the sword or in battle that there's so few men that the women who have been widowed, they are looking for any man that they can attach themselves to. Do you follow what's going on historically speaking here? Does that make sense? Yes, Fred. Absolutely. Naomi, and we know that from the book of Ruth, what we see happen. And so things are really, really bad. So bad to the point that literally one poor fella could have pick of 7 women, is what we're seeing here, right? Goes on. This is a really short chapter. What we need to see here is the imagery first that we need to look out for is around productivity and fruitfulness as who the source of that comes from, okay? As we read these next few sentences, I want you to think about the productivity of the fruit and where it comes from. Verse 2, on that day, the branch of Yahweh shall become beautiful and glorious. When you think about the branch of Yahweh, what comes to mind? What about Jesus? Yes, etz. The Hebrew word etz comes to mind. What comes to mind when you think about the words of Jesus? I am the vine, you are the branches. Apart from me, you shall. He is forecasting, prophesying the demise of Zion, of Israel. So he's looking into, as Isaiah the prophet here, he is speaking into the fight, because timeline-wise, in the book of Isaiah, we are not yet at the full collapse of the kingdoms. He's prophesying toward the full collapse of the kingdoms. Does that make sense? So, and the fruit of the land shall become the pride and glory of the survivors of Israel. We in America, because we can run down the road to food outlet or we can stop at the 7-Eleven, we take produce for granted. But when you think about an Israelite, when you look at the TV series The Chosen, they specifically call out the food because the food was so important. And what was so important about the food? What is Israel famous for to this day? Olives, figs, grapes. Those are like 3 major pieces of their agricultural industry that are significant. And it's because of the type of soil that they're in and because of the blessings of God on that soil. If you've not had a chance, there's a movie that you can go out and buy I'll try to remember the name of it and post it to our group me group this week. But I would encourage you to go out and actually pay for it and download it. But it talks about how the land of Israel is actually producing again, like miraculously producing. Yes, very much so. Um, the land, though, is like producing abundantly all of a sudden in our time now. And when it's been relatively fallow, speaking to Old Testament times of the promised land of a land filled with milk and honey. And so there's this renewal and this sense of the blessings of God within Israel right now, even upon the land as we know it. And they did not take in this time period at all that for granted, because the blessings of God were, remember, we're in the promised land in Isaiah. That is where we exist historically tonight, is in that promised land, and it's beginning to wane. They're seeing that the fruits of this land are beginning to stave off some. And this shall happen, Isaiah says. He who is left in Zion, Jerusalem, and he who remains in Jerusalem will be called holy. So does that mean that everyone was evil? No, there was a remnant is the key word that we would use here. A remnant of people who are holy. That because everyone written for life in Jerusalem. It's a hard sentence. It's he's he's mixing the two. And in the next chapter, he's going to actually open that metaphor up and use the vineyard as a metaphor. But Isaiah is mixing the two deliberately. Kelly said, she was saying, is it literal or is it figurative language? It's both. Because Isaiah is deliberately portraying the people as something that would be important to them, like the produce of the land. Does that make sense? When the Lord has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion, the word filth there, think of New Testament again. What do you think of when you think of filth and women? It is what you're thinking. It's the menstrual rags. The actual Hebrew word here is the Hebrew word, and I don't know why they didn't translate it like that, but if you look at the Hebrew, it is actually the menstrual rags of the daughters of Zion will be washed. The Lord has washed away the filth of the daughter. Isn't that interesting? Where does that directly connect you to? The ministry of Jesus talks. Paul talks about that, right? I mean, we see that in the New Testament. That's direct connection. There's a new. I'll show you just briefly because I think it's just such a cool tool. It's called the Bible Book Explorer. It's in the brand new version of Logos, and I love how we can interconnect things. Look at this. This is a I can't remember what they call this chart type now. This chart, though, is showing us whenever we hover over Isaiah, all of these links that you're seeing. I can't move my pointer out so it'll actually move the chart. All of these links that you're seeing are direct connection citations into the other books of the Bible out of Isaiah. And so now inside Logos, this is a brand new feature that they brought out in this release this year. I can actually click in and I can see every citation directly out of Isaiah graphed into the individual Bible verses in the New Testament that it was pointing toward. It'll do all. It'll do all. Mm-hmm. It would absolutely, yeah. If there were any references, we'll go back here for a second. If there were any direct references into, it would pull those in as well so that we could see them. Exodus. Yeah, yeah. But I thought that was neat. That's a cool tool to me. You can see all the direct links right in there. Anyway, we'll go back. Yes. Sir? Yes. I'm not sure. We'd have to look at that. You said it was in Proverbs? Oh, no, yeah. So, and this shall happen, the filth of the daughters of Zion, and cleanse the blood of Jerusalem from her midst. The blood, New Testament link again, right? Think about that for a second. And cleanse the blood of Jerusalem. Whose blood are we cleansed by? The blood of Jesus. Isn't that interesting? And we see from her midst by a spirit of judgment and by a spirit of burning. The spirit of judgment and by a spirit of burning. What we see here is actually this spirit of burning. Every time we look at burning, it's most oftentimes associated from a scriptural standpoint to a purging. And that is interesting because linguistically, whenever you look at purging and you look at the filth that was described above, you see the connection? I'm sorry, what? I don't know about that. So we keep going here. Then Yahweh will create over all the site of the Mount of Zion, over all of Jerusalem, and over her assembly, a cloud by day. Where's that come out of? Straight out of Exodus, in my opinion. A cloud by day and smoke and the brightness of flaming fire by night. If you're an Israelite reading this, that ought to be like, oh, he's talking about whenever we came out of Egypt, right? Indeed, over all the glory there will be a canopy. Now, a canopy that we're looking at here is, the Hebrew word is huppah. And it's the canopy that we see used today, even in the Jewish wedding ceremony, of the hoop, the four-post house made out of wood structure that you see in the Chosen series where they have the marriage ceremony. That's the huppah, and that is the marriage canopy. When you think of the marriage of the Israelites to Yahweh, where should your mind go? Where was the marriage of the Israelites to Yahweh? Where did it occur? Mount Sinai in Exodus. And it will be a shelter for shade from the heat by day. Why would that be important to an Israelite? Where were they whenever they left Egypt? They were exposed to the heat of the day in the wilderness, and a refuge and a hiding place from rainstorm and from rain. Now, I had to look that up. I was like, what's the difference between rainstorm and rain? Why did the author use both of those? Rainstorm in this case for us would be a thunderstorm, and rain would just be rain. Okay, so it would be a shelter from those two catastrophic events occurring from the heavens. Do you see the significance? When God descended on Mount Sinai, what descended with him that announced his presence? Lightning, thunder, the trumpets. You see, Isaiah is not messing with this unintentionally. He is directly connecting this to connect it into the ancient Hebrew mind. So we keep going now in Isaiah 5. Like I said, 4 is a very short chapter. I want you to keep these two things in mind as we prepare for this metaphor like Kelly was talking about. Is this figurative or is it literal? He's going to take us one step deeper into the metaphor. And the metaphor now is going to change between these two things. Yahweh, in the metaphor we're about to read, is the vineyard owner, the ventress. Okay? He's going to be the one that grooms the vineyard. And then the people of Yahweh are the fruit. They are the vines. They are the ones that... the fruit coming off the vines and branches, okay? So here we go. This image that you see on the right was taken in, obviously, modern times, not in Hebrew times. But the image on the right is a very good example of what a watchtower inside of a cucumber field or a melon field would have looked like in ancient Hebrew times. Remember, when the harvest came, they would go and live at the ripening of the fruit in the fields with the fruit to protect them from animals or other predators, human or not, that may come and try to steal the fruit or eat the fruit off the vine. And so I thought that was interesting. I thought it was a good image kind of to put in your mind, because they did build literal rock homes to live in, because they would be in them for a few weeks at a time. And so they would want to remain out of the elements. And I thought that was a good example. Here in chapter 5, verse 1, let me sing for my beloved a song of my love concerning his vineyard. Okay? We're already stepping into the metaphor here. And you ought to have a country song in your head at this point. You know, this is like a good Hank Williams song. All right, let me sing for my beloved a song of my love concerning his vineyard, his people. Who's the people of God? The Israelites, his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard. Yahweh had a vineyard on a fertile hill, the promised land of Zion. And he dug it and he cleared it of stones. He took care of it before they ever had to touch it. And he planted it with choice grapevines, like the really good Merlot grapes. And he built a watchtower in the middle of it so that he could keep a watch over it. And he even hewed out a wine vat in it because it was such a good wine field. He would process the wine directly where he was. Right off the grapes, he would take them and just stomp them. Right? Have you ever seen a wine vat in ancient Israel? Again, if you take an opportunity to watch The Chosen, they do an excellent representation of one where she's hanging on to ropes and she's stomping grapes. And she's in like a cistern that's been made out of hewn stone. And there's a funnel that's allowing it to pour out into jars. And she's stomping it with her bare, clean feet. I'm just saying it's clean because otherwise you'd have funky feet wine. You know, here she is. She's stepping on this wine, and this juice is coming out of the wine, and they're right there in the field. And so instead of transporting the produce and bruising it and taking it to a city to have it processed, this owner of this vineyard knows that it's such precious fruit that he's created a wine press directly there in the vineyard. They're not even putting it on a cart. They're cutting it off and bringing it in the baskets and pouring it directly over into the wine press. You get the imagery? And he waited, and it yielded grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. Not Scuffenines. This is the bad stuff. What do you mean? I planted this vine. It was the choicest vine. You were my choice from Egypt. You were my precious thing. And I brought you out and I prepared for you a place in the promised land. I sent hornets before you to drive the people out. I drove the hornets before you just in time so that the land would not be overgrown with briars. Do you remember from Exodus? I didn't drive them all out at once because I didn't like the land to be consumed and be overgrown. So the Canaanites and the Philistines had been farming that land for years, and I drove them out just in front of you so that you could walk directly into a field that had been already tilled and the stones had already been taken out of it so that the soil would give it the best possibility for growth. And yet, all of this haughtiness, and now I grow wild grapes. And the grapes are so unproductive. Look at what he tells us. And now, inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, the people who live in Jerusalem, and then the people that live in the country of the southern kingdom of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. God invites them through the prophet Isaiah to have a conversation with him. Judge between what I've done for you, how I've put this vineyard that has been choicely planted for you. What more was there to do for my vineyard? What did I have not already done that I have not done in it? What was left that needed to be done with the gift that I gave you? I feel the Holy Spirit right this moment. What else was needed with the gift of Jesus in our life? Nothing. Why did I hope for it to yield grapes, and it yielded wild grapes? I had hopes in you. I brought you out of exile. You knew what slavery was like, and yet you've deliberately gone back to it. Do you see a pleading of a father? I gave you every opportunity, a father looking at his children. I put food on the table for you. I gave you shelter. I sent you to a good school. I gave you every opportunity to excel in life. And you have yielded nothing but waste. I have a friend of mine whose daughter is struggling immensely. He says, I've got a son who is excelling in life. Wonderful marriage, multiple children, a nice, beautiful home, great job, and his daughter, who is just a few years younger than his son, living in destitute on her own choosing, addicted to marijuana, with a child by a man that's no longer in the home, and just frustrated by it and thinking, I can hear his voice in this too. You see what I'm saying? And so all of a sudden he turns and he says, and now let me tell you what I myself am about to do to my vineyard. I chose this. I gave you every opportunity. Now let me tell you what consequence will come up. And look who takes the action here, by the way. Yahweh does. Yahweh is about to take this action. So when people say to you, oh, I serve a New Testament God. The God of the Bible is the same in the Old Testament as he is in the New Testament. We better be paying attention. I will remove its hedge. Who will do this? Yahweh will. And it shall become a devastation. I will break down its wall, the stone wall that I have built to keep the sheep and the oxen and other people out of this vineyard. I will break down that stone wall, and it shall become a trampling. The vineyard will be trampled by the cows. The cows don't care. The sheep don't care. They're going to eat the whole vine. The goats don't care. They'll eat everything that's on the vine. And I will make it a wasteland. It shall not be pruned and hoed or taken care of. It shall be overgrown with briars and thorn bushes. And concerning the clouds, I will command them not to send rain down upon it anymore. That's God speaking. And he's speaking metaphorically to the people that have chosen to turn their back on him through their behaviors. For the vineyard of Yahweh of hosts, you see the Yahweh of hosts there? The divine council? The Yahweh of hosts is the house of Israel. Yahweh's declaring now, in case you didn't get the metaphor, I want you to be clear. I am the one speaking. And the man of Judah is the plantation of his delight. I wanted to make sure this word, because in our history, we think of, these beautiful homes, these plantation homes that we have, like mansions around, and we think, oh, so if you read this in our context, we would think, oh, no, he's not talking about a plantation house. He's talking about the fact that used to describe the fruit of their labor. This word being used here is saying the fruit that should be coming from Jerusalem, from Judea, should be a fruit of delight for me. I should be taking delight in the fact that you have produced this fruit. And he waited for justice. But look, bloodshed. But we keep seeing blood in this, right? And is blood good in this argument? No. Blood cries out. Yes. Blood is not typically good in the Old Testament. Not typically. Sacrificially it is, but outside of the sacrificial system, bloodshed is not for righteousness. But look, a cry of distress instead. Those who join house with house, they join field together with field until there is no place. What does he mean by that? The wealthy just keep getting wealthier. The house that they had was not good enough, so they bought the house next to them too. And then they bought that field. And then that field, what's the old adage that talks about, I don't want all the land, I just want the land that's connected to mine? Do you understand? And that's really that adage coming true biblically, is that this rich man saying that I want the field connected to my field and the house connected to my house, and my wealth is just going to keep, and you are caused to dwell alone in the midst of the land. You've isolated yourself in your hunger for the wealth. Yahweh of hosts, see that again, over and over again, said in my ears, this is Isaiah, this is what Yahweh said to me, surely many houses shall become a desolation. All these riches that you built, does that not sound like New Testament talk there? It's directly from Jesus. You have wealth and you build what? More barns. And large and beautiful ones without inhabitants. For 10 acres of vineyard shall yield 1 bath of wine. Now, a bath is about 4.5 gallons. Typical yield on a vineyard, I looked it up because I was like, I don't understand the significance of this verse. I don't understand the math of it. A 10-acre vineyard should yield about 1,200 gallons of wine. And this 1-acre field yielded 4.5. Do you see how bad the produce is? How it's not producing what God intended? And the seed of a homer will yield an ephah. 1/10 of the seed sown was producing anything. In other words, we should have an exponential multiplication of seed, right? Whenever we plant wheat, a single wheat berry should grow a stalk and should produce multiple additional wheat berries then, right? If you don't wheat, whenever you can have red and white wheat berries, that's what you beat off the chaff of the seed. One should not produce a 10. He's saying if I planted 10 wheat berries and 10 stalks of wheat grew, only one of those stalks would produce. You should have like 10 multiplied times another 10-fold. You should have 100-fold increase, but 1/10 of the seed that's sown is producing in the land because it's so unfruitful. Now remember, he's metaphorically talking about the land, but he's directly mapping this onto the people's life. So your life is producing this kind of bad growth. Those who rise early in the morning, they pursue strong drink. What kind of strong drink? It's 5 o'clock somewhere is what Alan Jackson would say, right? That kind of strong drink, Those who linger in the evening, wine inflames them. They're drinking. Wake up in the morning and they're drinking, and they go to bed at night and they're drinking. You see that? I mean, in other words, they're overindulgence. They're gorging themselves. They are, what's the right word? Glutton. They're gluttonous. And it's not directed at wine, right? Gluttony can be for food, it's many things. Those who linger in the evening, wine inflames them. And there will be lyre and harp, tambourine and flute, and wine at their feast. But they do not look at the deeds of Yahweh. They don't glorify God. Is God saying that the fruit of the wine, is wrong? Is he saying that the lyre and the harp are wrong? Not at all. He's saying what you've done, though, is you've taken these things and you have removed the glory that they are due to shine a light on, and you've made them for your glory and for your honor. You've turned music into something that brings glory to man instead of something that brings glory to God. And they do not see the works of his hands. You're not paying attention. You've become so haughty, so self-absorbed, that you won't even pay attention and give thanks for the basic principles, the basic foundations of life, like food. He goes on, therefore, because y'all have done this, my people will go into exile without knowledge of me, without an understanding. I will let you go back to your demise. Hold on a second. God, you brought them out of Egypt. I never told them to go to Egypt. And I saved them from Egypt. And now look what they've done, and I'll let them return to Egypt. This time it'll just be to the east instead of the west. I'll send you to Assyria. And their nobles will be men of hunger, and their multitude is parched with thirst. If you don't know, the water cycle in Israel, in the Promised Land, is all connected to the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. It is a constant water cycle that runs literally from the south to the north. And so as today, even the water rights in Israel are like the biggest thing that are fought over. It's a huge battle in modern times for the water rights in Israel, because there is only a few places where you get natural water. And so who controls the water controls a lot of the fruit and the productivity of the people and the land. And so here, whenever he says, and their multitude is parched with thirst, that is an indictment. Therefore, Sheol, Kelly talked about earlier, Cain and Abel, the land would open up. We get this image of the land opening its mouth to swallow evil. Therefore, Sheol has enlarged its throat, and it has opened wide its mouth without limit, like it's unhinged its jaw like a shark. And her nobles will go down, and her multitudes, her tumult, and those who revel in her. You'll be swallowed by the evilness. And humankind is bowed down, and man is brought low, and the eyes of the haughty are humiliated. Please, Lord, take us through chapter 5 fast, because it's getting bad. You know, that's 1 through 5, if you don't remember, are like the indictment, and we're at the end of the indictment, like the crescendo. But Yahweh of hosts is exalted by justice. But Yahweh of hosts is exalted by justice, and the holy God shows himself holy by righteousness, because he himself is righteous. He needs no one else to testify to it. And then the lambs will graze as in their pastures, and fatlings, kids will eat among the sites of the ruins. See, when God purges the land, why did he bring Israel into the promised land? For whose benefit? For his glory. We've changed it to be for the Israelites' glory, but the scripture clearly teaches that they were brought into the land to expel evil from the land. And now God is, do you see the circle again of history? God is opening up the mouth of the land to swallow the evil up again, to get rid of it. Go on. Okay. 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 Yes. Number 16, you said? I'm glad you said that. Yes. Maps. That's very good. That's very good. Okay. Number 16. Okay, so we'll read that. That's really good. Okay. We might study that next week as a rehearsal. Verse 18. Those who drag iniquity along with cords of falsehood and sin as with rope of the cart. I put this imagery in here to give you an idea. Map it onto the top of this imagery. They drag, think of that being the cart, the sins being that cart, along with the cords of falsehood, these false beliefs, these things that they've substituted for the righteousness of God, things that they put in place of what Yahweh intended as a rope of the cart. Like they're pulling this weight. Like they could be freed. The yoke, do we think of Jesus? My yoke is, yes, it's light. And we see this weight of the sin that's being pulled. Man, the Bible's so connected to one another. And so we go on, he says, 19, those who say, let him make haste, let him hurry his work so that we may see it and let it draw near. And let the plan of the Holy One of Israel come so that we may know it. You say, oh, we wouldn't say that. Oh, Jesus, come quick. Save us from this evil place. You see? Then he goes on, those who call evil good and good evil. Those who put darkness for light and light for darkness. You've mixed up the order of God. You've allowed chaos to represent goodness. Those who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. You know what that tastes like in good fruit. Those wild grapes versus those choice grapes. Those who are wise in their own eyes and have understanding in their view. This makes sense to me now. Now that you've explained it to me that way, I understand. It's a genetic issue that they're dealing with. What they're dealing with is, they're bent toward this, God created them in this way, and so we can't condemn that lifestyle. I'm speaking in modern terms, if you get my drift. Heroes at drinking wine. Heroes at drinking wine. We celebrate wine on our stinking t-shirts. I drank my way through. Kelly and I met a couple one time in Asheville, and the couple said, we think they were asking us to go drinking with them because we were on top of this Mount Mitchell, and they said, we drank our way from Asheville all the way to wherever, Flat Rock or whatever it was. We've been to 7 bars today. And I'm thinking, how in the world did you walk? I'll tell y'all that story some other time. There's more to go with that story that is wonderful. I actually have a picture that goes with that story. Those who acquit the guilty because of a bribe and remove the justice of the innocent from him. You've judged improperly. You've taken a sack full of money and decided that you would look the other way. Does that make sense? All right, we're going to stop there tonight because we're out of time. I thought we would get further. I don't know where we got hung up on good stuff. Yes.